welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to tackle the dilemma of how do you handle a difficult child in the lesson room. I'm going to pair this with, the general, what do you actually do, how do you handle it, with some real life personal examples that I've experienced and how I handled them. So the first thing you have to remember is, again, kids are kids. And most of the students you get, they are going to be generally pretty well behaved. But kids also have a set of parameters that goes with them because they're little people. So they don't know a lot of things about life and how they're supposed to act around other people. Yeah, they have to be taught this. I mean, I know I had to be. But it's just to where you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. So kids can be difficult for a number of reasons. A lot of times is that they're tired, they had a long day at school, they're overstressed, and if you think kids don't have anything to be stressed about these days, which they shouldn't because they're kids, these days they are. They're overbooked. They have 17 different activities in the course of a day. They have a nanny that rushes them off to school in the morning, at least in a big city like LA. I don't know about any other part of the country because I haven't lived outside of LA for years. But they have tons of homework. They spread them so thin that they're stressed out and tired all the time. So that can make them difficult in the first place. I mean, I know I'd be a stressed out little shit if my parents did that to me. I don't get it because they're not allowed to be kids anymore because they are so overbooked. It's ridiculous, but it's a fact of life. So keep that in mind. That's the reason they can be difficult just for any of that. The first thing, you just try to figure out what's the problem. So if the kid is tired or crabby, case-by-case basis. You got to try to get something out of them because your job is to teach them whatever you're supposed to for the day. Sometimes this isn't going to be an option. You're just going to, sometimes you'll play counselor and just try to get them through that half hour. And if they're being really difficult, that half hour is going to feel like an eternity. So just be prepared for that. Sometimes you just got to listen to what their problem is for the day, and you don't get very much playing done. We're going to do another episode on that sometime down the road. Sometimes you just play counselor and you don't teach any music for the day. And just maintain composure, be understanding as much as you can. Don't lose your cool. It's the worst thing you can do. I've never ever lost it with a student. I've come real close, but I've never actually exploded. I got a nasty temper, really nasty, but it doesn't come out of me unless it's like all bets are off and I just snap, which only happens in extreme situations, fortunately, because my job makes it to where I can't if I want to keep my job. So, and it's never been a situation that was so volatile in the lesson room or concerning a student or a parent where I had to even close to go there. They'll piss you off big time, but it's not super threatening most of the time. They're just general irritances. So the patience thing comes into play more than it does on any other time of day or any time you teach. So again, just keep your composure and try to find out what the problem is that day. And also try to just keep them engaged. If you can just get them to talk about something they enjoy, if they'll talk to you. Sometimes they get so pissed off and grumpy that they actually clam up and they don't want to talk at all. I've had kids like that. But if you can get them talking about their video games or something that they enjoy or something that just makes them feel a little bit better, then you're golden because you kind of got them back on track a little bit. And just try to move forward with whatever is working. Sometimes they're going to get mad and hit the strings really hard and they're just not going to be cooperative that day. So, it's a case-by-case basis, but just do the best you can and move on from there. You also want to communicate with the parent that day if they're there, because they usually are, especially if the kid's really young, about, we had a rough day today, and they'll usually tell you why, because if they've been with them before they dropped them off, they knew the kid was being difficult that day. But, just let them know, hey, we just gave them what they could, and we worked on this, and it'll probably be better next week, because most of the time it's not a normal occurrence, unless you have a kid that's just a consistent pain in the ass. This isn't going to be a thing that you deal with every week for most of your students. So a few real world examples of difficult children that I've dealt with and how I handle them. I know I'm being kind of vague on how to deal with this, but it's such a situation that's so unique to each individual case. I mean, I don't have a handbook for you, but if you've dealt with kids at all, if you have a nephew or you're a parent yourself, I'm not, but I mean, I've been dealing with kids for 30 years as a teacher. Then you know a lot of this already, but it's just different when you're in a musical teaching environment. There are some different parameters. So one of my students would come into the room, and I'd had this student for a while, and he's a student I can be really direct with. He's about 9, and he will just be like, most of the time. One of my assignments for him after a while was that he needed to smile more, because the kid literally looked like he was plotting to take out everybody in the room a lot of the time. It just kind of the way he was. He was a good kid. I hadn't seen him for a while, but either way, he would do things like I'd ask him a question, and he'd just go, and I'm like, really, dude? That doesn't help me, doesn't help you. So you have to speak to me to tell me what you mean by that, because shrugging your shoulders doesn't help anything. And I'd tell him this over and over again. And then he would whine that his fingers hurt, this, that, and the other. And that's a normal thing you're going to encounter anyway. That's not necessarily being difficult, but it's non-communicative, which makes it harder for you to do your job. So kids are smart. They will test you to see what they can get away with. They most certainly will. If you don't believe me, just start teaching. You find out real quick. So, and they do it on purpose. That's just how they're wired. But the more that you let them know by your actions and your consistency that won't be tolerated, you're going to have an easier time with them, because they'll respect you for that eventually. And if they don't, there's just nothing you can do about that. But you're the one in charge. You're the boss. So don't allow them to think that they are, because then you won't get anywhere with them. That student eventually became a good, thorough, consistently good player. I just had to keep on him. Another time, I went to a student's home who was throwing a tantrum when I got there, and the dad was yelling at him to get in the room, and he was going to do his lesson, and I could hear the mom over saying that you're making this so difficult and uncomfortable for Seth, and it was the first time it ever happened. It happened at another student's home. So here's what you do in that situation. You sit down, and you just smile, and you just look at the clock, and as long as they throw their shit fit tantrum, whatever you want to call it, they're eating away the time that you're being paid for, because you're only there from the time you get there till the time the lesson is supposed to end. So, you're still getting paid no matter what, and makes your job even easier. So don't think those situations are bad. Just set up your materials and wait for them to come out and do the thing. And if they don't, it's like, hey, we'll see you next week, and they still have to pay you. So don't let that discourage you. It can actually be good, because it makes your job even easier. The worst one I ever had was a piano student when I did teach beginning piano, of a child that refused to do his lesson for the day. And eventually, because his mom would sit outside in the car, it was a little mom and pop store, and I finally got to the point where I said, okay, I'm going to go get your mom, because he was refusing to do anything. And the kid literally would grab my arm and scream, "No!" and tried to pull me back inside the store so I couldn't go out and talk to his mother. And brought him back in, had the kid apologize, figured out that his problem was something to do with the friend he had stay the night over, or something where he was upset about it and just was deciding to be difficult that day. Had to apologize to me for wasting my time and teach him that wasn't acceptable. The kid was like 6 years old, so not super surprising, but it got neutralized pretty quickly. So, and I kept my cool the whole time. Believe me, I didn't want to, because that's an example of when you are an underpaid babysitter. Discipline it's applied where it should be applied more. And I'm not advocating beating children. It's just, you know, whatever form of discipline needs to be applied, sometimes it's different for every kid. I know some kids don't respond to that. I got the belt or the wooden spoon. It worked. So, but either way, I know this has been a little bit of a interesting episode, but the main thing to remember here is, again, keep your composure. Try to find out what's wrong with the child at that time, whether they're just tired or they've had a rough day, they're difficult. Again, always communicate with the parents. Try to keep the lesson moving forward as much as possible. Still try to get something done. And then when they're being ultra difficult, again, just keep your cool and work with the parent, because they'll almost always be involved, if not always. And remember, you're still getting paid, whether they're being angels, whether they're being really cool, or whether they're throwing a massive tantrum and it's stressing you out. You know, you're still getting paid for the day. And that's the main thing to consider. And again, keep in mind that these are all individual case-by-case basis, so there's not really like a handbook, but there are general guidelines that you have to keep in mind when applying these tactics, so that you can still keep your job and try to appease that student the best you can. And again, you can only do the best you can. Most of the time, if you're a good teacher and you have good rapport with your students are going to love you and they're going to enjoy seeing you every week. So if they're being difficult, that's probably an uncommon occurrence. The screaming kid in the last example was difficult most of the time, but that was just that one kid. So most of the time, they're pretty cool. So until next time, thanks for tuning in. Hit the subscribe button and the bell, and we will see you on the next video. Peace.